Hey, how's it going, everyone? In today's video, I'm going to continue discussing how we can go about working individual bits of musical material into the body or hands, specifically linear single note melodic phrases or fragments. I'll be going through another example in a similar fashion as the example from the last video to help reinforce your understanding of all this. And I'm going to elaborate on how exactly to practice this stuff to ensure that you could efficiently squeeze as much benefit as you can out of doing this sort of work. We're going to get right to it, but really quickly, if you're new, welcome. My name is Derek Clavin. This channel is basically like a free online jazz guitar course that tries to unfold in a logical sort of manner. So if you really want to benefit the most, I would go back to the beginning and try to go in order as best as you can. A lot of the videos I know are long, but what you could do is watch this video first since you clicked on it, and if you like it, then you can go back and watch maybe the first 3 or 4 episodes, and then you can take it from there. And I'm also available for private lessons and have a lot of available accompanying PDFs that go along with a lot of the videos on this channel, like this one today, and information for all this stuff can be found on my website as well as my Patreon. Real quick, I just wanted to say that personally, I think this can be one of the most important videos that I've put out on this channel if you're really serious about trying to achieve some real results. And although it turned out a little bit more rambly and longer than I expected, I'll be making some different points all throughout this video that you really may find beneficial and valuable, alright? So I really recommend that you stick around to the end. And if you do, thank you. I really appreciate that. It means a lot to me, and I hope you enjoy. Now, originally, I actually had a few other examples in mind that I was thinking about using in this video here today, but I ended up with the example that we're about to get into because I figured I'd be able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So, you're probably wondering, what is this guy talking about? So, if you've already been an avid viewer of the channel and you happen to have seen episode 49, you may remember that I introduced this little feature to the channel that I named Rex, the corniest name ever, and all it is just a growing list of jazz album recommendations that I think are really great and worth checking out, and you may not have heard of them before, alright? So, I've been meaning to give you the second one for a while now, but these videos have been turning out so long and I don't want to overload you. So, I figured today would be a good opportunity to give you another recommendation, and the example that we're going to look at is actually from one of the tracks on this album, alright? And also, before we get into it, I'll let you know that I created a page on my website devoted to this, so if you ever want to see the whole list of recommendations that I've given you guys so far, all you gotta do is go there to check it out, so you don't have to fish around the channel for all my recommendations, alright? So, the album that I want to recommend today is this great little album that features Ray Charles and Milt Jackson entitled Soul Brothers from 1957. This album to me is so cool for several reasons. First of all, not only do you get to hear these classic musicians playing their main instruments, but other ones as well. So not only does Ray Charles play the piano on this record, but you also get to hear him play the alto sax on the first 2 tracks, and he sounds great. He totally has his sound together. He sounds just as good as anyone else, and the phrases that he plays are just so cool. And what we're going to look at today is actually one of those phrases, alright? In addition to this, not only do we get to hear Milt Jackson on the vibes, but we also get to hear him on the piano, and I think also on the guitar for one track. Another cool thing about this record is that of the 5 tracks that are on here, I'm pretty sure all of them are blues, except for the last one. The last tune is not like a straight 12-bar blues, but it's bluesy, to say the least, you know, and if you're a true jazz fan, you know, who doesn't want a record full of, you know, blues tunes or jams, you know? And the sound of this record, the language on it by everyone is just so good. If you're looking for true, authentic, you know, jazzy, bluesy language that you could learn a lot from, and just the sound of everyone, their tone, everything, this is it right here, alright? And in addition to these 2, this album also features, let me just bring this up, we got Skeeter Best on the guitar, who I don't know much about, but he also sounds great on this record. Definitely some stuff that you may want to check out. Oscar Pettiford on the bass, Connie Kay on the drums, and Billy Mitchell on the tenor sax, alright? So, like I said, the language on this record is incredible, and the overall sound is just so nice in my opinion, so I would really recommend checking this one out. Anyway, the example that we're going to get into now is, like I said before, coming from Ray Charles on the alto saxophone, and this is off of the first track on the record entitled Soul Brothers, so it's the title track, I guess. And just to give you a little bit of harmonic context so you can understand what you're listening to before I play it in a second, this song is basically a 12-bar blues in the key of F, and the phrase largely all falls within bar 6 of the form, and that's the second bar of the 4 chord. We go to the 4 chord in bar 5, and then, this is the next measure. So technically it comes in the 8th note before the end of 4 in bar 5, just as like a pickup, but pretty much the whole thing after that falls in bar 6, alright? So check this out. Cool. So first, I'm just going to break this down a little bit for you. So the fingering that I originally worked this out under would be up here, basically like this. Hopefully I get it correct. Right? So we'll talk about the fingering more afterwards, but from an analysis point of view, like I said, this is on the 4 chord of a blues within the key of F, alright? So if we're in the key of F, the 4 chord would be like a B flat 7. And if you look at the notes that I'm playing, I mean, that already is just the straight up diatonic, regular old dominant 7 arpeggio. And then he goes into the extensions, the 9, the sharp 11, and then the 13. And then after that, he just kind of has these grace notes. He plays it again, and then kind of chromatically flows down to that and just ends it, right? But those are the same notes as before. So excluding if we just look at the rest of it, it's basically outlining the full diatonic arpeggio. And with the sharp 11, we would say that technically it's coming out of like a Lydian dominant scale, B flat Lydian dominant, or B flat 7 sharp 11 sound. And one good thing that we can learn from this particular example is that the dominant 7 sharp 11 chord in particular often sounds good when it's put on the 4 chord. It also works good as a 2-7 kind of a sound. So you learn these different things by seeing what works in different examples and what the analysis is, alright? But to me, this phrase is a really good example of showing us why it's really important to learn actual language, because from a harmonic point of view, there is really nothing, interesting happening here at all. He's just literally outlining the basic arpeggio. So if I were to give you kind of what I think makes this phrase unique, it'd be a few things. First of all, even though he starts on the root, it's really a pickup. So from like a strong downbeat point of view, he's kind of like leading into the third, so it's not like you're hearing the root on a downbeat. Then I think the fact that he slides into that note, and then when he continues up, this one, that's like a short staccato, and I think the combination of the slide there and then the short note there, that's a big part of what makes this phrase. Like that. And then from there, obviously that does as well, those little grace notes, that does so much to the overall effect and feel of the line, right? And this is my whole point. You're never going to learn that type of stuff from learning things about, like scales, arpeggios, triads. All that stuff may be important, but you're not going to really be able to learn a lot of this other stuff that I'm talking about, in my opinion, efficiently enough if you're not actually studying real language, because it's like you don't know what you don't know, and it's very unlikely that you'll be able to kind of just quickly discover a lot of these types of ideas or ways of playing phrases on your own if you're just kind of thinking improvisationally or spontaneously trying to come up with ideas. Now, I want to remind everyone that when we're doing this kind of work that we're about to get into here, All that we're really concerned with for now is the body component and literally just the sheer technical ability to play something fluently so that hopefully we wouldn't have to think about it so much if we ever ended up hearing it in the moment when we were playing and then tried to use it, all right? So if we really want to be able to work an idea into the body or hands and know it well on our instrument, the first thing to understand is basically what I was showing you guys in the last episode, where we want to take an idea and work out the different possible fingerings for that idea that would fit within the different positions or fingerings for the cage system, right? So for this example, like I said, it was going over a B flat 7 chord, and if we just think diatonically, B flat 7 is related to the key of E flat major. So essentially, we're going to be working out the fingerings around the cage fingerings of the key of E flat major, right? So the way that I played it before to begin with already perfectly fit within one of the cage fingerings, and that would be the D position for the key of E flat major. And some people may think of it as, F Dorian, but it's all diatonic, right? So when we look at this phrase, everything up to a point fits perfectly within the notes that we find within that fingering or position for that scale or key, right? And then we get to this note, and technically speaking, it's not in the exact, F Dorian or E flat major scale there, but most of us probably realize that if we thought of it relating to F minor, that's just the major 7. So it's basically turning the scale into an F melodic minor scale at that point, but my point is, you don't really have to have a whole other system with, cage fingerings for melodic minor or harmonic minor, because it's just too much to concern yourself with. It's easier to just kind of use one set of fingerings and then kind of understand the variations and what you could do to change it, right? And then with these notes over here, yeah, those are just grace notes and passing tones. So in that context, we don't really think of it as like a different scale or anything. We're just kind of, filling up the space rhythmically if it works, right? So one thing I will say as a side point, though, if we're talking about harmony on the guitar, that may be interesting to consider. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about here, but basically we took like a F Dorian tonality, even though it's not being used like that when we play it in the original context, and we turned it into F melodic minor. So even though any of these fingerings can be seen as any of the modes for whatever scale we're dealing with, and that depends on the harmonic context, it could be useful to understand like how the modes convert to the other scales. So like in this case, like the Dorian sort of shape turns into melodic minor. The next shape, which I see usually is like a Locrian shape, turns into Locrian natural 2. The next shape, which would be Aeolian, turns into Mixolydian flat 6. That's interesting to consider because it's like minor goes to dominant. Then the Mixolydian scale turns into Lydian dominant. And then, you got the last one, too. I think of it as like Phrygian, natural 6, whatever. That's the melodic minor. That turns into the Phrygian in the regular cage. So, holy crap, that was a mouthful. But there you go for all the harmony nerds, right? Now, if you're a guitarist who's truly serious about trying to improve your jazz improvisation skills, this is really where you want to listen up, because the stuff I'm about to say is, in my opinion, not only the most important thing in this video, but maybe one of the most important things amongst the entire channel for actually giving you the results that you want. Alright, so in the last video I briefly mentioned the idea of, taking one of the fingerings that you may have worked out and basically moving it up or down. So, if I start with the fingering that I showed you before, mainly what I'll do is I'll move it up and down in half steps, right? So just move everything down a half step, right? I'll also do whole steps sometimes, whatever I'm kind of feeling. Typically, if I've done it before or I'm feeling comfortable or familiar, I want to save some time. But, it's also good to kind of know it, doing it that way as well. Right? But it could be whatever you want. Now, typically, when I do something like this, the phrase or whatever it is that I'm working on is coming from something that may be part of a entire piece of material that I play like an etude, like I've talked about. This I really just learned individually for this video, and you could totally do something like that as well. It doesn't really matter, but I'm bringing this up because I already have some sort of familiarity with one way of playing it, although sometimes that way that I always play it within the piece may not actually fit within one of the fingerings, and I have to start with something new. But either way, I'm usually coming with some sort of familiarity. But if you need to practice the lick or whatever it is in time with the metronome at any speed to make sure you can get it smooth and you need to do that work, that's what you want to do. But I don't really do that stuff because I can generally execute it in time and I understand what the idea is. So if you feel like that, when I do this sort of thing, I don't really use the metronome because, it's just inefficient and I'm playing it so much anyway, and I'm giving myself a lot of reinforcement to play the idea and different keys and positions and whatnot. And also, in addition to that, this is a great opportunity to engage the musical spirit like I talk about as well. So if you're kind of just singing along with the phrases as you move the idea up or down, you're subconsciously working the musical idea into your spirit and what you may hear so that it might come out when you actually play. And that's a big part of it as well. As obvious as doing something like this may be, in my opinion, this is one of the best possible practices that you could do if you want real results, all right? If you want to talk about what's the work, this is it right here. You got to understand that this is really mainly about working on the technique or the body component and getting stuff into the hands. And I think, maybe the reason why I and a lot of other people can relate may not have really thought about things in this kind of way for a long time is because the guitar, one of the things with the guitar is that it's a shape-based instrument, and I think that that's to our advantage as well as our disadvantage because there's different ways that we have to sort of seek out to see how we may play something and what may work for a certain idea. So because it's such a shape-based instrument, we have the privilege of, like, if we learn something and we can sort of easily recognize the shape of what it is, we can understand that we can play that in any other key if we just move it to the right fret. And for me personally, in my experience, I think I overestimated my ability to do that. And just because you may think that you understand that shape and you can just easily do it in another key, if you haven't practiced it and literally moved it up and down, you may not realize how much you may not know it, And even just to move it to the very next, fret or key, I messed it up there, but, it's going to get your mind working a lot faster, and you can look at this as working on your technique, just like if you were to practice stuff like scales or arpeggios. If you do that stuff in time or whatever, I would say that's still working on your technique as well, but at least you're working on actual musical ideas and you're getting it into the hands here. So you're getting so much benefit out of doing this sort of work. And another thing to consider is that, we're basically taking things through all the keys, but really, moving it through all the positions, a certain fingering on the guitar. And I think as guitar players, we can be confused because for all instruments, it's often a good idea to take things through all keys within the circle of fourths or something like that. And I still think that that could be a good idea, and that's still good for training your ear to kind of hear the way keys move or ideas move through the keys and sort of recognizing that sound. So that's still good. But from a sheer technical point of view and the ability to play something, moving it just literally up and down and taking the shape and doing that, as simple as it sounds, that's really the best thing that you could do to, improve your fluency and your ability to play whatever it is you're working on. So if you're trying to get as much benefit as you can from this, the thing to really do is to go through all the possible fingerings that may be available for a given idea or phrase and do the same thing. Move it up and down, the shape in a parallel fashion, up and down the fretboard in half steps or whole steps, and do that with all the possible fingerings. And like I say, every idea is unique, so you're always going to find unique things within different examples. So, for instance, you may find situations, especially if you have an idea that is maybe short and within a small range of notes, where that idea may be possible within two different octaves within one position of the cage system. Or maybe you'll get certain situations where it's a really long idea with a big range and you can't even play it in every position, right? But the cage system, like I say, is just used as a blueprint or a system of organization, so it makes it easier to basically go through this work, and it essentially tells you what to do and tells you where to find the fingerings for whatever the idea is, and you just adjust accordingly whenever you need to. So I'm just going to go through the rest of these fingerings here and, kind of move them around a little bit. And if anyone's interested, I have a PDF available that includes all the other fingerings tabbed out and everything if you like this lick, all right? So moving it down, the next position of technically a E flat major key would be the E position, which could also kind of be seen as like D Locrian. Now, like I always say, it's all about the phrase and what's unique. So if I really wanted to play every note within this phrase, I would actually have to kind of jump it down an octave after the first note. So basically it would be like this. Right? And that's okay. No one ever said I have to play the phrase exactly the same. This is all just about doing work or, musical exercises essentially, just to kind of work ideas into your hands and your ears and everything. So it's all about exploring different possibilities and see what may be available and what you could do. And I don't even have to try to think of these ideas because they're just inevitable by putting them into these fingerings. So another thing within this fingering is, after this, it's basically like it's going up D half diminished arpeggio, and then it goes to like the natural 9, because that's the sort of out of the original scale note. So when you're dealing with cage fingerings, you don't really get like 2 whole steps like that range, and that note, if you were to stay in position, would maybe be played there, but you want to play it here for this phrase because it'll just feel better. If I go, it's easier to jump with your pinky here to the ring finger on the next string as opposed to going, even here I might have to jump back, or if I played this with the ring finger, that might work too, but these are just different things to consider. But anyway, yeah, I could do the same thing and move it down. And also, I should remind you guys, because I know I'm messing up my technique, this is a good opportunity actually to focus on your technique, because that's what you're working on. Even if I'm kind of like not focusing and compromising it here, like that's bad. Learn from me. I'm also focusing on the idea and trying to play it right, especially if it's a new idea, but you always want to play with good technique if possible. Now, typically, if I take a shape or a fingering for something and I move it down the fretboard in this parallel fashion, if I end up on the bottom, which may not always be the case, I may start here and move it up, but if this is where I finish, what I'll often do is I'll take that fingering for whatever the idea is that happens to fit within a certain position or fingering of the cage system, and I'll basically move it up like an octave or maybe a fret or 2 more just for more range, and then essentially I'll work backwards. So whatever position of the cage system that I'm in for whatever the key I just was in, I'll basically go to the one before it that diatonically relates, and then I'll figure out what the fingering or whatever would be or how I would play it within that position, and then I would move that one down as well. And it's good to realize that, for me, by this point, I'm not really too concerned with the original key or harmonic context of the idea, because if I'm moving this all around anyway, if I finish an idea over here, it may not be the original key anyway, and then I move it up here, it'll, also may not be the original key, and then if I move it to another position, it may be a different starting point as well, and I always want to try to cover a large range, so it doesn't really matter, and by this point, I'm already starting to see the phrase in a more independent kind of way anyway that isn't attached to the original musical context, and that's good, so this way you can kind of see more ways of using it and not be always attached to its original application. So coming from where we were just in the E position, and now we're going to move to the G position, and from a guitar fingering point of view, you may think of this shape also as kind of like an Aeolian shape, so I'm just going to play it up here at the 12th fret, and for this position and this idea, we need to do the same thing where we start on a certain note that would be within range and then play the phrase down an octave from there. So same thing as the last one, basically like, right? So, as far as fingerings and everything, like I said, you always want it to be accommodating the best feel for how the phrase should sound. So, you know, when I get to this part, the fingering is interesting because I start here, and then I like to play this note with the index finger, but if you were trying to properly stay within the position, typically that fret there would be played with the middle finger, but I jump to this one because I'm going to go up here next, which technically may be out of the position, but it feels best there. And this note, this is actually really supposed to be played over here, but it just feels better if you do everything on one string over here, right? Oh, sorry. Alright, so I can move it down. Sorry. I also really like this shape for all different ideas when I'm kind of seeing like a minor chord on the A string, right? Because, if I'm in this position, we could see that as C Aeolian, and you can certainly use it like that, but more commonly you may see that position as like a F minor and maybe like a 2 chord. But we're not talking about application here, right? And, another interesting thing about this kind of work that I really appreciate is that, a lot of times when people are talking about working on individual phrases or bits of vocabulary, a lot of people will do things where they'll take the original idea and they'll create a lot of variation on it in different kinds of ways. So, for instance, some things that you may be able to do would be things like taking the phrase and rhythmically displacing it so that it starts in different parts of the bar, different beats, like upbeats or downbeats. You can take the original notes and alter them so that the phrase, fits a different harmony or tonality. You can take the idea and move it diatonically up a scale so that you can understand it, from different degrees of the key and how it would sound. You could split up the phrase and keep one part consistent and then make variations on the other. So there's a lot of things you could do, and all that stuff is fine, and I do stuff like that sometimes, and I've definitely gotten things out of that as well. But for me, I think it's more important to take ideas and just play them verbatim, but in all these different kinds of ways and positions and keys, and just know how to play it on your guitar so that if you like that idea and you end up hearing it in the moment, it's way more likely that you're going to be able to use it. Especially if you do the other sort of work that involves more of the application and developing the mind, but that'll come later. So after this shape, the next shape would be the A shape, and from a fingering point of view, you also may kind of associate this with like the Mixolydian fingering or scale, right? So now when we get to this shape and we're considering the original idea, we can go back to how we played it before where we don't have to jump down an octave and we can cover the full range of the phrase, the way it's supposed to be. So that's good. So in this position it would be like this. Right? Now, there's a lot of good things about this position. First of all, if we related it to the original idea, that was over a dominant chord, but we didn't start in that position. But if you were to think about playing over a dominant chord, say like I do that in F there. This applies to any kind of chord, but if I'm going to be playing any kind of F chord, whatever my idea is, it's very likely that I may be thinking around the position that relates to the F root note, either here or down here. Or on the A string, right? There are different ways of seeing it, like I talked about with the cage system. So if I'm thinking F dominant and I'm thinking around here, that's like the Mixolydian, if you want to see it like that, position. So it's more likely, if I want to use this idea in that sort of dominant context, that I would be using this position. And the other good thing about it is that it feels really good and comfortable. Everything is, right where it needs to be. Right? And that brings up another good point that I think is important to consider, which is that when you're doing this kind of work, the point of it is not necessarily to be able to perfectly be able to play all the fingerings fluently for a given idea and know them so well and memorize that you can use them all equally in different situations, because you just know that idea in and out. If you got to that point with an idea, that would still be amazing, but I hope you realize that that's a little crazy if, you're thinking it has to be like that. And first of all, a lot of the ideas that you learn are just going to be forgotten completely, and the ones that do stick, what will often happen is that there will likely be 2 or 3 fingerings for any given idea that may end up sticking around in your playing that you feel comfortable with and you like to play them that way, and that'll become part of your language and what you do. But all the other work that you may think is being forgotten is still great work every time you do it, because anytime you do this work, we're subconsciously, developing our fluency and intuition within these different fingerings, so that if we're going to play for real and we find ourselves within these different positions, because we've worked through so much actual musical material within them, we just have a better sort of sense for, where notes lie and what we may be hearing, so this way we can access them accurately. Alright, so now we're going to move to the last position, which would be the C position in this case, which I kind of associate as like a Phrygian scale, or Lydian is related to it as well, especially when I'm kind of like hearing it. For this one, I ended up kind of playing that part on 2 different strings and sliding here, and then, pull off. That's what felt good to me there in this position, I know my technique is real bad with this, but this is the work. Alright? So you get the idea? So I want to wrap this up now by saying that, for me, every time I do this sort of work, light bulbs are going off and I benefit tremendously, and I really would suggest that you try this out, because as obvious as this kind of work may be, and like I said earlier, you may think that you can pull off the other shapes, or you understand, where they would be, and you don't have to put in that much work, but I'm telling you, doing this sort of work and exploration on any given musical idea will open up a lot of doors for you just automatically, because the system basically tells you what to do and you basically work through it, and there's a lot of advantages to be gained from it. Alright, so I don't think I need to sell this anymore, so we're gonna leave it there. If anyone has any questions or anything that they want to say, please put it in the comments. I'm here to help. And in the next episode,
hope you're ready for the next episode. Hey,
I'm actually excited to say that I'm gonna look at another example that is actually coming from this exact same thing. It's another Ray Charles line from this same solo and the same track, because I think I like this other line maybe even more than this one, and that's what it's all about. Like I always say, you gotta go after the stuff that you like, and there's a lot of cool things that I could say about this particular phrase that I didn't really say today, so, just be extra food for thought and interesting things to consider. So I'm excited to talk about it, and I hope you're ready as well. So that's it. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you gave it a like and consider becoming a subscriber, as well as a contributor to Patreon, where you'll get all the PDFs on this channel for only $5 a month. And if you think anyone else would enjoy the content, please share it with them also, and I will see you guys in episode 65.
Swinging and playing the blues. That's what we about.
I try to help you.